Every year at the end of September, schools across the TDSB have an Orange Shirt Day. And since this year we're not all together in the same building at the same time, some of us are virtual, some of us are in on alternating days, I thought I would take our campaign and read the announcements that you would have heard on the morning announcements every day leading up to Orange Shirt Day and go virtual. Have you ever wondered why we read the territorial acknowledgement each morning? We read it to recognize that Aboriginal people were the first nation in Canada, and we settled on their land. We read it to acknowledge the harm that the residential school system inflicted on First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children. Did you know the Canadian residential school system operated in Canada from 1870 until 1996? Children as young as 6 were taken away from their families. And in that time, approximately 150,000 Aboriginal children were sent to church-run schools, and it is estimated that up to 30,000 of those died due to malnourishment, tuberculosis, and other diseases caused by poor living conditions. Worse, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse were rampant in the system. Why Orange? Why September 30th? Orange Shirt Day is commemorated every year at the end of September because this is the time that the government would enter Native communities and collect Indigenous children. Some families willingly sent their children to schools under the promise of protection and education. Some families didn't have a choice. Either way, it was a hard time for families because they knew they might not see their children for many years. But there's more. We wear orange because of Phyllis Webstad, an Indigenous woman from Manitoba. When she was 6 years old, she was sent to a residential school from a home in Dog Creek on the Dog Creek Reserve. For her first day of school, her grandmother bought her a new shirt to wear. It was orange and shiny and had a string laced up the front. When she got to school, officials took away her shirt. But that's not all they took away. They stripped her culture, her traditions, her language. In the early 20th century, American President Theodore Roosevelt said, "The only good Indian is a dead Indian." He wasn't Canadian, but the sentiment wasn't much different here, and the officially sanctioned aim of the Canadian government in creating the residential school system was to kill the Indian in the child, and that's a direct quote. And they did. They killed the Indian inside Phyllis Webstad like they did to so many other Indigenous children. So we wear orange on September 30th, not just for Phyllis and for others who suffered in the school system, but for those who continue to suffer today. In 2008, the Canadian government launched the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, independent of government influence, to guide Canadians through the difficult discovery of the facts behind the residential school system. The report made 94 calls to action in an attempt to lay the foundation for lasting reconciliation with First Nations peoples across Canada. Some of the calls to action include a cash settlement for the 80,000 First Nations people still living in Canada who are victims of the residential school system. Recommendations about child welfare, language, and education for Indigenous communities. Justice for Aboriginals in the legal system. Social programs and funding, and a long overdue national inquiry into thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women and children. The residential school system is a legacy that haunts our country. And that's why every day of the school year we hear the territorial acknowledgement. It's to show our respect for each other and the land on which we live, which is not only in keeping with Indigenous protocol to acknowledge the traditional territories and ancestral lands, but also to help build respectful relationships between Aboriginals and non-Aboriginals in Canada. Hearing the territorial acknowledgement every day acknowledges that Canada's First Nations people cared for the land that we now call Canada for thousands of years before us, and reminds us all that we are part of something bigger than our Confederation in 1867. However, Orange Shirt Day isn't simply an isolated event reserved for one day of commemoration. The lessons we learned from Phyllis Webstad and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission can transfer to other aspects of our life. Because of the actions started 150 years ago, we not only learn that we need to accept everybody for their differences and unique personalities, but to celebrate and foster differences within our school and the broader community. How can we do that? We can be accepting of everyone's culture, religion, language, and traditions, whether or not we agree or understand. And to that end, we can learn more about each other's culture and language and religion and traditions. We can be careful of the words, actions, and even the thoughts we have. We can think about our part in environmental stewardship and about conserving a healthy planet for future generations. We can commemorate the harm of the residential school system while also celebrating differences and moving forward in the spirit of positivity and reconciliation. Orange Shirt Day may commemorate a horrible legacy, but it's also a chance for us now to reflect and grow. And so, before I end this video, I'd like to acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. I also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples.